Well, 5 weeks without a video. Didn't see that coming, but I will explain why I had 5 weeks without a video after these titles. So, in this episode, we're going to be rounding up 5 weeks worth of content. So much so, I've actually got notes written for this one. There's no way I can remember everything, so let's give it a go. So, rounding up 5 weeks, which is week 43 through to week 47, which is week 12 through to 16 of New Zealand. You probably noticed I've got the map up behind me today. Slightly different setting, still in clearways, but so much to explain. I think you'll benefit more if I have a map behind me for this. You'll be able to visualise where I've been going, and hopefully I'll be able to jog my memory doing this. So, week 43 and 44, not much really happened in that. So much so, it got to the end of those 2 weeks and I'd only done 2 flights. So I didn't feel that there was enough content there to round up to do an episode. So anyhow, I'll round them up now, because basically what happened was I got a little bit ahead of schedule. So scheduling then started not scheduling me as much. Like, I was being booked for 2 free flights a week, which sounds alright. But the weather recently has been very bad. I mean, I think there was 1 week I only flew 1 flight, so not great. But anyhow, did my first 2 navigation flights with an instructor, and basically everyone does the same route for their first nav flight here at L3. So I'm going to point it out on the chart. So where are we? So Hamilton is up here. Ignore this route for now. I'll explain what this is later. Here's Hamilton. First route goes from Hamilton to, where is it? Tirau, Koparahi, Raglan, back into Hamilton. It's quite an easy flight. You can fly it at a relatively low altitude. If you really want to, you can fly almost everything at 2,000 feet. There's only a couple of sections that you really need to climb up on, and that's probably Raglan to Hamilton, but even then you could actually come back at a lower altitude. You just have to do a bit of hazard avoid around some high terrain. So that flight went very well. It was relatively clear weather for once. Really pleased with how it went. Good feedback from the instructor. For me, the technique used for navigation is a bit different compared to what I've used before. What I used to do at home was, with my PPL side of it, is we used to go halfway along the leg, work out how far off course we were in terms of an angle. So if it was 5 degrees off course, to get back on course to our destination, we do a 10-degree correction, 5 degrees parallel track, 5 degrees more to correct back onto course, which works quite well. But with some of the particularly long legs we're doing here, that can be used, but it's easier just to work out how many degrees off course you are now, and then do something called a standard closing angle, which is where I think for the speed that I fly at, for every mile you are off course, you do a closing angle of 30 to 35 degrees for 1 minute per mile. So that's quite good, so it gets you on course straight away, and then you only have to apply the error that was along your route. So say for example the wind was a bit stronger than originally planned, you can correct for that and you'll be back on course straight away, rather than doing half a route and then going, okay, in 20 miles time I'll be back on course with this method. If you're 3 miles off course, in 3 minutes time you will be back on course. So the second navigation flight that I did with an instructor, on this flight we have to do a diversion. So I just have to remind myself of the routes. Oh yes, so I went to, obviously from Hamilton, down to a place called Kinloch, which is down here, which is really near Taupo. And the problem with the Taupo is it's not a manned control tower airfield, but it is the busiest location on the entire of North Island for parachute jumping. So on a nice day, it can be incredibly busy. I think it was on this day though, there wasn't much parachute jumping going on, so that wasn't really an issue. And then once we got to Kinloch, we then headed towards Tahara Iron Sands. But as I was getting en route, I was then given the instruction from Te Kuiti, divert to, I think it was Putaruru. And basically, I think I was about halfway between Kinloch and Te Kuiti, and that was when I was given the instruction to, okay, you're going to be diverting at Te Kuiti to Putaruru. And the whole point of a diver is you have got to be able to pilot an aircraft and successfully be able to divert. So at the very minimum, you need to be able to come up with a heading adjusted for wind, an altitude to fly at, and your timings. And that's not just for the whole leg, that's also for your event cycle features along the route. So that's quite a lot to do. The more you can do, the better. If you can add 6-minute markers, even better. It makes your life even better. But you have to eyeball all of this, like your distance, your angles, everything has to be eyeballed. So if you get it bang on the first attempt, you have been very lucky. Like, if you can eyeball a leg to within 5 degrees, that's exceptional. Anything within 10 degrees is more than adequate. And at the end of the day, you can start flying a leg and you can immediately see if you're going on or off track. And you just apply standard closing angle principles to get back on. So that was the first 2 navs. The third nav is a solo, and it's basically the first nav but in reverse. So Hamilton, Raglan, Raglan, Copenhagen, Raglan, Tyrrell, Hamilton. That was a new one. That particular day, I thought I was going to be cancelled, and then it turned out the weather was a bit better than originally planned. And it turned out it was just about flyable. Like, when I say just about flyable, there's the legal requirement, then we also have the L3 Ops Manual requirement, which is a lot stricter compared to the New Zealand requirements. For example, we have to be clear of terrain. Like, the weather I think it's the cloud base has to be clear of terrain by 2,000 feet. So, if you plan on flying over a hill that's at 4,500 feet, you are required to have a 6,500 foot cloud base. It's ridiculous, but there we go. Many flights get cancelled for this, but on this occasion it was just over 2,000 feet AGL. So I was able to fly the route, and I think I got on the way from Raglan to Copenhagen, and I realised the weather was starting to deteriorate, but it turned out the weather on my route was better than diverting back to Hamilton. So the safer option for me was to just continue the flight and fly the legs, because it's all planned out. There's no point flying towards worse weather if you haven't got plans for it. You might as well stick to the planned route, especially if the weather is either equal or better. So that was quite a good experience. But yeah, what was it after that? Oh yes, and then at this point, I think scheduling realised I was no longer ahead of schedule, but now I was actually starting to fall behind schedule, so now I was starting to get rostered a bit more. So my next flight was a general handling and circuits flight, 2 hours. Once again, the weather wasn't amazing, but it was good enough to do general handling and circuits. Pretty much all of the nav flights were cancelled that day. So basically what I did was I went out into the eastern training area for about just under an hour, and then I noticed the weather was starting to turn, so I thought, well, you know what, all the nav flights have been cancelled, the crosswind's getting up. I've got a quite high crosswind in it, so I can stay up in higher crosswind conditions. And I basically went back to Hamilton and just said, any chance I can start my circuit slot half an hour earlier, because originally you're only supposed to do half an hour of circuits, but I was showing up an hour early. But I basically called them up and I ended up being the only guy on the circuit for an hour, which is great because I did 8 touch and goes in the end. And it basically, just before this flight, I'd received a lot of feedback from people ahead of me in the course who had done their PT1 profile, which is the equivalent to the PPL skills test. And they'd said a lot of the senior instructors are penalising people for not maintaining the centre line bang on. like within like 2 or 3 feet they're looking for. So this is really tough if it's a strong crosswind. And I think on this day it was quite near to my 15 knot crosswind limit. I think it was 12 knots crosswind component on this particular day. So I really worked on my centerline tracking on this lesson, and at the end of it, really pleased with how it went. So that was well worth the extra circuits. So after that, went on to navigation 4 solo. And for this one, I did basically nav 2 in reverse, which is Hamilton, Tahara Island Sands, Tahara Island Sands, back down to Kinloch, Kinloch, back into Hamilton. On this occasion, it was actually glorious weather. I managed to get 5,500 feet on one of my legs, so that made a change. On this particular day, there was a lot of parachute dropping going on at Taupo. If I originally planned on going into Taupo, I wouldn't have done a touch and go over there. I think at one point, I think within a 5-minute period, there was 3 parachute jumping aircraft dropping from like 10 and 16,000 feet was the numbers I think I heard, so it's crazy. And at the end of the day, they have rights of way, so it's up to powered aircraft to stay out of the way of people basically throwing themselves out of an aircraft because we have more control than they do, but that's how things work. So after that, I went back into another navigation flight, but this was a dual one and it was instruments. And this flight is probably one of the hardest flights, nav flights you'll do initially. Because we go to, get this around the right way, Rotorua, and then up to Tauranga, and then back to Hamilton. All in a space of 1.5 hours. And on this occasion, the weather was really good, surprisingly. Flew to Rotorua, that was a new airfield. Massive lake next to it, but it was quite a nice flight actually. I quite enjoyed flying to Rotorua. And then as I was flying to Tauranga, we called up Tauranga and we didn't get any response on the radio and was just like, oh dear, we had a radio failure. And then we tuned up the ATIS and we realised we were so late in the day that the tower had already clocked off and gone home. So technically Tauranga became uncontrolled airspace, so I think it was like technically class G at that time. But hats off to my instructor, he still made me fly the standard arrival procedures. So he made me fly the welcome bay arrival and hospital departure, so that when I did this flight in future, I knew how to fly these arrivals. We ended up doing a few circuits at Tauranga because there was no one around and I had a few essential exercises up for renewal. I think one of them was like the glide approach, go around. There was a few others thrown in there. And then after that we came back to Hamilton, which we have to do via Tyrrell because even though you can do it directly, it can cause problems with airspace and terrain clearance. There is a gap, but it's so tight that L3 has just turned around and said, no, you cannot fly this directly, you have to do it via Tyrrell. So after that, I went into Navigation 6, which is a solo flight, and it's basically the same flight as Nav 5, but in reverse. So instead of doing Rotorua, Tauranga, Hamilton, I do Hamilton, Tauranga, Rotorua, back to Hamilton. Tried this on the first day, weather looked fine, was flying along, got to Tyrrell, no problems. Started flying towards Tauranga, and I noticed that the cloud base, which I checked on the webcams earlier, and on the webcam earlier it looked like there was at least 2,000 feet between the tops of the Kaiwais and the cloud base. In the hour it had taken me to pre-flight the aircraft, taxi out, get my clearances, get out to the eastern training area past Tyrrell, that cloud had sunk and had just sat on top of the mountains. And I was literally flying along and I was thinking, there's not a gap there, and I ended up turning around and returning to Hamilton. So that is what's known as a Y flight here at L3, and it's basically where you are unable to complete the objectives of the flight, but it was not your fault. Usually it's weather related. For me, that was the first time it had ever happened. Usually you will have several of these at this point, but I've been extremely lucky. Either I've cancelled because the weather's been that bad, or I've flown and the weather has maintained a good margin. So that was the first wide flight, and then shortly after that, went for it again, and yeah, I flew the whole thing, but at this point, scheduling realised I was actually quite a bit behind the original plan. So I was being rostered twice a day, 6 days of the week. And this was starting to take its toll on me. Even though I was getting enough sleep, it was, even though most of the flights were cancelled, when you plan for a nav, it is hours of work. It's not just a case of showing up to the aircraft, draw a line on the map, and away you go. No. There is loads of planning to do. You have to pick a route that you know is going to be safe. You have to pick minimum sector altitudes. So if you went into cloud, you have to have an altitude to climb up to. You have to have a contingency plan. You have to plan your fuel, your frequencies, everything on your route. Print a weather brief off, go to your Cat B instructor, brief them on everything, do your mass and balance for the aircraft performance. By the time you add all this up, I mean, that's not everything. Even just getting cancelled, it takes its toll on you. And I did this flight, Hamilton, Rotorua, back to Hamilton. And I came back and I felt shattered. And I was just like, goodness me, I've got a second flight later on today. I need to get some sleep. Like I went straight back to Clearways, straight to bed, and 2 hours went just like that. Woke up, had some food, straight back into the training centre, and I was originally planning on doing, an instruments flight. I was so tired from the previous schedule. Basically what happened was, I'd gone from a schedule that was putting me late in the day to a schedule that put me in early mornings, like waking up at 4 in the morning kind of day and not finishing until late afternoon. Like, very tight with duty time limitations. And in the end, I just turned around to my instructor and just said, enough is enough. This schedule is ridiculous. I'm exhausted. There is no way I'm going to go and fly an aircraft right now. And I literally signed myself off for the rest of that day. I took the next day off, and I can, without a shadow of a doubt, say that was one of the best decisions I could have made. So, even though I pulled myself off the schedule and it was due to tiredness, the safety officer called me in and he said, no, I can understand why you was tired, that shouldn't have happened. Basically, it was just too much duty time in a short period of time. I'd gone from lates to earlys with no break in the middle. So, bit of advice for anyone doing any kind of flying. If you feel you are tired at all, and like you think, well, I've been getting loads of sleep, but I'm just not feeling 100%, don't fly. Take a day or two off and come back refreshed, because I came back in 2 days later and absolutely... Well, that's the first time that's happened. I actually filled up a memory card on my camera, so I was talking to myself for about 5 minutes then, so I'm just going to try and pick up from where I think the camera cut off. So I basically ended saying absolutely, and then it cut off. So basically I was going to say I absolutely nailed my flight 2 days later, which, I'm now going to pick it up, was Hamilton to Taumarunui, into Taupo, back to Hamilton. And I actually landed at Taupo on this occasion. So the number of times I've flown near it, this time I actually went into it. And ended up running a little bit late coming out of Taupo because a Air New Zealand -8 showed up, and I probably could have sneaked in before them, but you don't really want to cut up a commercial airliner when you're in a single engine 2-seat aircraft. It doesn't go down very well with operations or the authorities. So basically I went into an orbit over, where was it? Probably about 2 miles to the west of the airfield, and then once I could see the Dash 8, I then went onto an extended downwind and basically followed doing whilst applying my own separation, because Taupo is a non-towered airfield. It's up to the pilots to apply their own separation and to work out who goes in when. So that was great fun. I mean, like, talking to an actual commercial airliner directly is just, it's weird. Like, at home, if you do that, there's almost always a controller in a tower, but at Taupo there's no tower, so that was good fun. And then coming back into Hamilton, it was basically the afternoon rush hour, which basically means that it's becoming the end of the day. Everyone is coming back at the same time, trying to beat 45 minutes before evening civil twilight kicks in, because we're required to be back by that time, so everyone usually piles in about 15 to 30 minutes before that. And I kid you not, I was over at Cambridge about to start the arrival procedure, and I realised I was number 9 on the arrival, so I knew this was going to be a tough arrival procedure. And in the end, I ended up doing a non-standard right-hand circuit overhead join onto an extended non-standard side downwind onto the small runway. It's really what you don't need after a long flight, but because I was well rested, I was able to handle the situation very well. And hats off to the controllers in Hamilton Tower. They know what they're doing, and flipping it. I've never known people to bash out instructions so rapidly to so many different aircraft. So Hamilton Tower, if you're watching this, hats off to you. So that was nav 7 solo, and then it was back onto instrument flying, and this was instruments 4 with an instructor. And for this flight I was told to plan from Hamilton up to Thames. Now at Hamilton we can only guarantee to get a departure via the east or western sectors. You can request a direct on track to Thames, for example, but there's no guarantees you'll get it. On this occasion I didn't get it, so I had to fly an east departure, parallel track until I was clear of the airspace, and then use standard closing angle to re-intercept my ECF, which was the base of the swamp up here. All of that whilst I had the IF hood on, which basically meant I could not see outside. So that's tricky, staying clear of controlled airspace when you can't see where you're going and you're not allowed to use GPS. However, I do know I didn't bust airspace because A, my instructor would have told me, and B, I checked my tracks after the flight and it was well clear. I'd overdone it technically, but you're better off overdoing than underdoing, because let's face it, if the options are flying a bit wider or busting airspace, you're going to want to fly wide. So that was a really good flight. And then as we was coming up to Thames, I then had to plan a divert to Matamata whilst under the instruments hood. So yeah, that was good fun, but it turns out I was pretty good at eyeballing the distance, the timings and the heading, because I had to apply no corrections for the whole route, so that was good on my part, but I will admit that was lucky. And then we got to Matamata, and we basically used the GPS that was in the aircraft to sort of do like a stepped instrument approach into the airfield. So that was good fun. So the instructor configured that all for me and gave me a series of headings to follow and said, right, intercept this radial from Matamata, fly the approach and descend at a rate of 500 feet per minute, and then once we get to our decision altitude, you can take the hood off and look up and see if there's a runway there. And the runway was there, but it was a bit off to the side, but for a first attempt that was pretty good going, and we did that once more. And then once we did that, we flew a couple of holding patterns and then flew back into Hamilton. So that was really good fun. We're now getting to stuff that I've never done before. So this is really good. Then after that, I did another general handling flight. Didn't do any circuits in this one because I couldn't get a circuit slot, and I basically said to my sign-out instructor, look, I did an hour of circuits last time, which is half an hour more than originally planned. So basically I didn't do any circuits on this lesson because I'd already covered it in the previous one. So I used this lesson to really refine my forced landings, my stalls, my slow flights, steep turns, all the things that are going to be covered in the PT1 tech check ride. So that was good fun, although really interestingly, there was quite a band of fog covering about half of the eastern train area. Some people turned back, I didn't, because there was clearly an area, like this area down here was just an absolute no-go. This area up here was cadet, no cloud, brilliant visibility, perfect. So that was a classic case of, yeah, I could have turned back, but I found an area that was very good, and my route back in was all clear. Although that ended up being quite interesting, because as I was coming back in, there was a front coming in from the south, and it decided to show up 2 hours early. So I think if I was another 10 or 15 minutes later coming back in, I would have probably been looking at a divert to Matamata, because that was some pretty heavy rain. And I was tying down the aircraft at that time, so I got absolutely soaked. Oh well, it's not happened too often, so I won't complain too much. And finally, to finally round up 5 weeks, I've got one more flight to go through, and that's Instruments 5, which I flew yesterday, and I went to a place called Tecuiti, which is down here. Again, had to fly that under the hood. Good news is though, because runway 18 was in use, which meant I was going that way, and Tecuiti is in the same direction, I managed to get a clearance from the control tower to depart direct on track to Tecuiti, 1200 feet or below, until clear of the control zone. So that was brilliant, so I didn't have to worry about too much corrections. Fortunately, I didn't have it that easy because the wind was not doing what it was forecast, and I had to apply 2 standard closing angles to finally get back on track to Tecuiti. So that was good fun. Tecuiti, how do I sum up that runway? It's a mess. It's the first part of it's tarmac, then it's gravel, then it's grass, and it's surrounded by high terrain. This is not a solo authorised airfield, you can only do it with an instructor. The first approach I shot, I was too high, too fast, and I had to go around. So the second time I came round, I literally had to hug the terrain to make the approach on profile. The touchdown was good, it was a really strong crosswind, I think it was about 12-14 knots area, so really strong, narrow runway, like the runway is narrower than the wingspan of the aircraft, so it's tight. And like, yeah, it was a good touch and go, but I feel if I was allowed there to go there on my own, I would not go there on my own. It's a bit sketchy for my liking, but if you've got an instructor with you, it seems to be okay. And then after that, we diverted again under the hood from Tecuiti to Tahora Sands, planned that, started flying that, and then whilst I was flying that, applying all the corrections, my instructor then said, okay, when you reach Tahora, divert to Redland. And let's just say the flying was fairly accurate, but considering the amount of workload I had, I feel like I did very well. So really pleased with how that flight went. Flew a few more holding patterns, did a couple of PFLs and a couple of stalls just to keep the instructor happy, and then flew back into Hamilton, and that is the end of that roundup. You've probably been asking yourself this for the whole video, what is this here? This is a flight I've been trying to do for about a week now. It's Hamilton to New Plymouth. It requires a 2.5 hour slot. Unfortunately, the weather has not played ball. The wind has been fine. I can deal with wind. I'm good at crosswind landing. Unless it's like storm force, I'm fine. Cloud base, however, pretty much every morning I've been getting up, the cloud base has been sitting at about 1,000 feet. And I need about a 4,000-5,000 foot cloud base for this route, so it's not really been happening. As of the time I've been recording this video, I've attempted this flight 6 times and not got off the ground once, so I did laugh. I went for the brief my instructor today about the flight to New Plymouth, and he was like, right, briefing on the flight, and I was like, this is the 6th attempt. I think I know how to brief the flight. And he was like, yeah, brief it anyway, and I'll just blast it out in 5 minutes. And he was like, yeah, you've definitely done this a few times. So hopefully next time I record a video, I finally would have made it to New Plymouth. Appreciate that this video has gone on for a long time, so if you've made it this far and you've enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and feel free to share it with anyone who you feel might be interested. Like I say, I didn't intend on this being 5 weeks without a video, but I hope you can appreciate everything that's gone on. So I won't guarantee I'll see you next week, because I'm still being scheduled for 2 flights a day, almost 6 days a week, although today was only 1 flight, so that made a nice change. So I've got the rest of the day off. On that note, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you whenever I can record a video. Bye bye.